In terms of literary analysis, what is the point of the Shire in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings? It's the home of the hobbits, Frodo, Merry, Pippin and Sam, and it immediately conjures up that music that we all know and love. Tolkien spends nearly 110 pages of his 407-page The Fellowship of the Ring in just the Shire. That's nearly 27% of this supposed adventure book taking place in one setting. To compare this to Star Wars A New Hope, Luke spends only 16% of the film in his Shire, Tatooine, and in The Force Awakens, Rey spends only 9% of her screen time in her Shire, Jakku. Tolkien clearly intended the Shire to play a very important role in the narrative, so let's talk about what that might be. The first thing that the Shire does in the narrative is it establishes what Joseph Campbell called the ordinary world. In his book, The Hero of a Thousand Faces, Campbell popularised an idea that many of you will be familiar with, the hero's journey, and the ordinary world is a central concept to that. It's the beginning point in the story that establishes a norm for the reader, a status quo that the characters exist in that will be disrupted later on in the plot, kickstarting the story. The ordinary world is the one in which strange things do not happen, the one in which the main character is just going about their everyday life. And Tolkien's ordinary world in the Shire is not just ordinary, but opposed to the unordinary. One of the first things that we learn of hobbits is that they are an unobtrusive people. They love peace and quiet. They like to have books filled with things that they already knew, set out fair and square with no contradictions. They know what they know, and they know that they don't know what they don't know, and they're happy with that. And we later learn that they're somewhat wary and suspicious of Bilbo with his unordinary treasures from the outside world, from Smaug's hoard. It's critical to note that in the hero's journey narrative structure, the ordinary world can be a mental or a physical state, or a mix of both, but Tolkien made it very physical in the Shire, and this leads us to the second function of the Shire in Tolkien's narrative. It helps us empathise with our two main characters, Frodo and Sam. There is also this beautiful hand-drawn map, and on a side note, this is one of the most beautiful books that I own. It is just absolutely incredible. I wanted it for years, finally got it, and I just like having it. Interestingly, Tolkien grounds the Shire in the human world more than any other place in Middle-earth, with names such as Took and Brandybuck and the name of the place itself, Shire, drawing on English etymology and language, with places like Berkshire. Its description of grasslands and green rolling hills reflects the English countryside, and this immediately sets up a dynamic whereby Frodo and Sam leaving the Shire is a transliteration for leaving our own ordinary world, our human one. And this is only reinforced by Tolkien with a note on the very first page of the prologue to The Fellowship of the Ring. But hobbits have never, in fact, studied magic of any kind. The hero's journey in The Lord of the Rings sets up an ordinary, non-magical world and contrasts it with an extraordinary magical world that we know is out there. And just like Sam yearning to see the elves, we long to see it too. The Shire serves as a very physical grounding point for the reader, setting us in the shoes of those venturing outside of the non-magical, ordinary world into the magical, extraordinary world. The third purpose that the Shire serves in the narrative is that it helps establish motivation for the characters. Fundamentally, Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin only really left for one reason: to save the Shire. That was the scope of their world, and they each keep returning to it throughout the story. When Sam sees the burning of the Shire in the Mirror of Galadriel, that motivates him rather than weakens him. Across just the Fellowship of the Ring, the Shire is mentioned 331 times. That's nearly once per page. And we get plenty of lines like this: "Then at a great distance, as if coming out of memories of the Shire, some sunlit early morning when the day called and doors were opening, he heard Sam's voice speaking." The Shire is continually used as this reference point for all things that are good, worth protecting, and more importantly, worth returning to. One of my favourite moments in Jackson's trilogy truly captures this.
Do you remember the Shire, Mr. Frodo? It'll be spring soon. The orchards will be in blossom, and the birds will be nesting in the hazel thicket.
Repeatedly, Tolkien shows us that home is worth remembering, it's worth returning to even after all they've seen throughout Middle-earth, and it's even worth dying for.
There'll be none left for the return journey. I don't think there will be a return journey, Mr. Frodo.
Tolkien gave us something real and tangible to care about, right from the beginning. The stakes of the story are less about what Sauron wants to do to the world, and more about what our characters, the hobbits, care about. This is one of the reasons that Middle-earth has such a strong sense of place. The Shire isn't just a setting, it has a whole lot of feelings and experiences attached to it. It's why we get the warm and fuzzies when we hear this music. And these feelings culminate in the fourth critical function that the Shire serves in the narrative, what Joseph Campbell called in The Hero's Journey, the return. The return is the moment at the end of the story where our heroes re-enter into their ordinary world as changed people, having learned more about themselves and the wider world. While the return can be mental or physical, Tolkien's emphasis on world building made this a very physical return to the Shire, much like how it was a very physical, ordinary world at the beginning. To compare this to Jakku in The Force Awakens or Tatooine in A New Hope, for both Rey and Luke, their ordinary worlds are set up at the beginning as a mental place of peace and everyday life. This is why when it comes to the end of their journey, the return is not a physical one for either of them. Things go back to their ordinary world of peace and everyday life, yes, but they never return to these places that they came from. This is part of the reason why, in my opinion, readers tend to care more about the Shire than they do about Jakku or Tatooine. The setting of the Shire itself plays a critical role in understanding the hero's journey in the story. The physical return to the Shire is a return to peace, to order, to home. The Shire is the connective tissue that brings the hero's journey full circle. This just isn't the case for either Jakku or Tatooine. They don't return there when they return to their ordinary world, meaning they don't play that same role in its narrative structure.
Oh, but what about the scouring of the Shire?
That's a great question, you leather fetish lighthouse, because I could hear some of you saying something curious happens at the end of the Return of the King. So it would seem like the natural place for the story to end is when the One Ring was destroyed and the major dramatic thread was resolved. But no. Tolkien wasn't finished, because when the hobbits first return to the Shire, they find that it has been taken over and corrupted by Saruman, with its trees felled and its waters poisoned. And now Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin must rouse the rest of the hobbits to fight them off and cast them out. David Harvey in his book, The Song of Middle-earth, has a really interesting commentary on this. The hobbits do not seek a particular objective. Their quest is to return to the place from whence they came, but they do not appreciate that they return in a form different from that in which they started. When they return to the Shire, they find it changed for the worse. But yeah, there's a whole lot of really interesting stuff about Tolkien's mythology in here. And it's this moment that the Shire fulfills its fifth critical role in the narrative by realising one of Tolkien's big themes. War changes everything. So Tolkien fought in the trenches of World War I. He had to make decisions of life and death, and he saw his friends fall and die around him. He was no stranger to the idea that war changes people. He intimately understood that even though the hero yearns to go back to their ordinary world of peace and innocence before all of it began, you might return, but you're never truly the same. And as Sam exclaims on finding the Shire, this is worse than Mordor. It comes home to you, they say, because it is home, and you remember it before it was ruined. Mordor has come to the Shire because war is not just something that happens to and changes the outside world. It's something that changes us internally as well. And this is an idea that Tolkien actually introduces in the first act of the Fellowship of the Ring. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out. And though we might win every single battle out there in the extraordinary world, our ordinary world can never be the same again. But that is all from me. Question of the day, which fictional place are you most sentimentally attached to? I'm probably most attached to the Shire, to be honest. That's kind of why I liked making this video so much. Other places might be... most fictional universes that I'm really into don't have as kind of iconic places as the Shire. Let me know yours down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this sort of literary analysis, because this is sort of a cross between my on-writing series and Lord of the Rings-ish, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. Come joining the Patreon Discord. We get to talk about on-writing a lot, we get to talk about Lord of the Rings, anything else you want to talk about. It's a really cool little community we have there. And thank you, of course, to my patrons who have been supporting me so far. You really do mean the world. Also, another video soon. Ugh. This is my biggest model and most expensive by far because stupid shipping to New Zealand. And I will be doing an unboxing video. Feel free to leave me your questions to do with, on a totally unrelated note, Harry Potter. And this can be to do with lore or to do with like how the story is written. In the meantime, come follow me on all my social medias, stay nerdy, stop your ears, and I'll see you in the future.